Welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner. And joining me, as he usually does, THI publisher Andrew Jones. Andrew, we're here to talk some football. Obviously, it's that time of year. I know we've been talking some basketball recently as well, but we are firmly in football season mode. In Carolina, we've been covering them for a long time, especially over this offseason. They've been getting a lot of attention, national attention. They've got a lot of guys thinking and a lot of experts thinking they may be able to potentially make a run for that ACC title game as well over the next couple months. And, AJ, that's what we're here to talk about. We're here to discuss 5 keys to Carolina reaching that ACC title game in Charlotte over the next couple months. AJ, first thing we're going to touch on, I think the biggest, maybe not the biggest, but this is the order we're going to go with. Number 1, the defensive line has to be at least average. We've talked a lot about the defensive line in the offseason. Mac Brown's talked a lot about the defensive line. Jay Bateman's touched on him in the few times we've talked to him. This is a group that had a lot of experience last season that lost guys. Jason Sturbridge, Aaron Crawford, to name a couple. There is some guys rising up the ranks. Ray Vahasek came on a little bit last year. Jaleel Taylor did as well. Tamari Fox, you still got Tamon Fox coming back as well. So there are guys there that have played a little bit, but mostly it's an inexperienced group. And for Carolina to reach that game in Charlotte, they've got to make sure that line is at least average for a majority of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And then some people might be saying, God, don't you think they have to be good or better than good? Well, that would be optimal if you're looking at this from a UNC perspective. But if you think about how good they are in the secondary and how good they are at linebacker, and you got Tamon Fox at one of those outside linebacker hybrid spots, and I think they're going to be in pretty good shape at the other one. If the defensive line, which the most experienced guy played 250 snaps last year, if they're average, it will allow Jay Bateman to do a lot of stuff with the rest of that defense that is very talented and actually has depth. They have depth in the secondary and at linebacker. So he'll be able to do a lot of things, use a lot of those athletes that are back there to be playmakers on the defensive side of the ball. Now, they're going to have to generate a pass rush from the line of scrimmage. Those guys are going to have to be able to put some pressure on the quarterback. They don't have to be in the quarterback's face all the time, but they have to do enough that Bateman doesn't have to bring the blitz all the time, doesn't have to send more than 4 guys to make quarterbacks move, because the more dudes they have to send to make quarterbacks move, the less opportunity they're going to have to make plays behind the defensive line, in the secondary with the linebackers doing stuff and the defensive backs doing stuff. So they have to be able to stop the run enough. They have to be able to generate enough of a pass rush, and they need at least 4 guys, really more than that. They need probably 6. But if they have at least 4 or 5 they can trust early and they can buy enough time to develop and build a little depth as the season goes on, that might be enough for this defense to be good enough to support an offense that could be very, very, or should be very, very prolific. So to get to Charlotte, the defensive front line has to be at least average. And if they're above average, even better. But if they're below average, I think it's going to minimize a lot of the stuff that Bateman wants to do, and I think that'll hurt this team a great deal.
Absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see how that D-line starts, but also not how they start against Syracuse, but how they develop as the year goes on. AJ, second thing, special teams, a topic we've been talking about really the entirety of the offseason. Obviously, Mac Brown brought in Javon DeWitt to lead that special teams group, so he completely switched it up. Did not have faith in the previous coach and the guys that were involved with that. Carolina's special team was okay last year, and I think that's the reason that Mac Brown made the switch. But, AJ, second key for Carolina reaching the ACC Championship game, special teams has to be much, much improved.
Yeah, they got to be more efficient in the kicking game. Noah Ruggles was okay in the short distance stuff, but had some issues. Otherwise, a couple key misses against Virginia Tech. It didn't cost them a game, but it was a big part in them losing that game. And right now, Grayson Atkins, a graduate transfer from Furman, Mac told us the other day if they would have played Monday, Atkins would have been the guy kicking the ball. But it goes way beyond that. They need more consistency from Ben Kearney. He's got a great leg, but there was a lot of inconsistency last season. They need him to be able to place the ball better, and the hang time has to be more consistent and all that kind of stuff. So they need that from the kicking game. The return game last year didn't give them much. Michael Carter had a 75-yard kickoff return one game, but otherwise they didn't get much at all. They mostly fair caught on punts. punt returns. They didn't do much with that, so they've got to be more explosive. They've got weapons back there. Looking forward to seeing what Josh Downs does in that role, which I think we're going to see at some point. And so they've got to be able to generate some real estate in the return game. I think the coverage area last year was probably what they were best and most consistent at, but they still need to be better, and they want to be better. Mac understands that if you're going to play for the ACC Championship and if you're going to make any kind of a dent nationally, they must be significantly better and more consistent than they were a year ago on special teams. And it's no coincidence that they had 2 full scrimmages and they went live in special teams for both of them. And then they had sort of, not a walkthrough, but a situational scrimmage last weekend where a lot of that day was dedicated to just learning how to deal with all the COVID protocols that they're faced with right now. But they did go live in special teams aside, other than tackling the returners. That's how important this staff has identified special teams for this team. So I think it's going to be very interesting right out of the gate to see how organized they are, how they handle that stuff, and see if they're consistent. You can't be great 3 or 4 times in your coverage and then be really bad once and give up 6 or give up a huge game, because it could change a game. So it's the third element. People think offense, defense. Special teams gets about 35, 40 plays a game. If you combine everything, you've got to be very, very good in that area in order to play for an ACC championship.
For sure. AJ, you talked about Josh Downs a little bit in that one. That's a perfect segue to our third key, and that's Carolina's got to get production out of their second wave of wide receivers. We know about the likes of De'Ami Brown, Daz Newsome, Bo Corrales, even Toe Groves a little bit. You kind of know what those guys are going to give you, but the Chaffrey Browns, the Antoine Greens, the Josh Downs, those guys are the guys that are going to have to step up and play some minutes and provide something for this team if they want to eventually play for an ACC championship game here in the next few years.
Yeah, Lonnie Galloway told us back in the summer when we had a Zoom with him that, the production was great last year. He had 2 wide receivers for 1,000 yards. Bo Corrales was around 600 and made highlight reel touchdown catches. But those guys were playing 80 snaps a game, 85 snaps a game. They want them closer to 60, and he believes they can have the same level of production because I'm not going to say they were saving themselves on snaps, but the way this offense is run, you have got to sell every play. You've got to run through those routes every time because that sets up stuff later on. And that's a lot of reps for these guys to be playing, especially a noon game in the heat. They didn't have any noon games last year until the bowl game, and it was like 40 degrees up in Annapolis that day, so it didn't matter. So they need the second wave to come in and have to be defended the same way. They need those guys to be able to step up and make plays and put even more pressure on the defense. So then when Daz Newsome and De'Ami Brown and Bo Corrales are not in the game, the offense still has to click. It still has to run. You don't want teams to then kind of load up a little bit more against the run because the receivers are not nearly as good. Now, it's obvious the second tier isn't going to be as good as a group as the first tier, but they need to be good enough. They need to be explosive, and we know they have those kind of guys there, but they have to get it done early, which will make game planning for Carolina a complete nightmare moving forward and will save the legs of the first-line players, the starters. So if they're in a close game against somebody, those guys will be even fresher in the fourth quarter than they were a year ago. And they were pretty fresh last year, but imagine if you increase their freshness a notch or two from a year ago. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it really is scary to think, especially with the likes of De'Ami Brown and Daz Newsome, both 1,000-yard receivers last year. If you can get those guys just a little bit of a higher percentage fresher, I mean, that wide receiver corps is going to be that much more dangerous. But we've talked about the wide receivers. Let's flip over the other side of the ball and touch on the secondary for our fourth key. Mac Brown's talked a lot about it. Obviously, a lot of the players and the coaches have as well. But the secondary is one of Carolina's deepest, if not the deepest position group that they have entering the season. I know they've lost a few guys to opting out in the transfer portal. But overall, a majority of Carolina's talent is back there at that secondary, AJ. And they're going to have to be as good as advertised if Carolina wants to have a shot at playing in that ACC title game.
Well, absolutely. It's if the defensive line is average, and if linebackers, what we think linebackers going to be, the secondary can turn Carolina in from a pretty good defense into a very good defense, especially with the ability these guys are going to have to get the ball. flip the field, get interceptions, just be around the ball so much. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how many guys they use in close games. Let's say Saturday against Syracuse is a close game. Well, how many different guys are going to play in the secondary? I think they trust 12 guys. And that's including nickel. You got nickel, 2 corners, and 2 safeties. So that's a lot of dudes that the staff, I think, feels very comfortable using. Some, of course, more than others. But they've got some big-time playmakers up back there. Jay Bateman told us last week he thinks that Storm Duck is an NFL player. Okay, we're going to see the debut of Kyler Michael as a UNC player. He was the number 53 player in the class nationally 2 years ago. 4-star kid who went to Clemson. By the way, he's got a national title ring. And we're going to get to see him. We're going to see Patrice Renee. Now he's healthy again. There are so many guys back there. Cameron Kelly, Don Chapman is going to be a starter on Saturday. We saw how well he played late last year. Really didn't play like a true freshman much of the time. They're so deep. They have so many guys. They have interchangeable parts. Bateman told us last week one of his goals is for Trey Morrison to play nickel, corner, and safety on the same possession, same series, which if it's a 3 and out, that means he's got to bounce around right away. I hope that happens, and when it does, we're going to have to catch it, and we're going to have to write about it because that's going to be really, really interesting to see. And I think what that does, it shows you how good Morrison is, but also if there's a problem somewhere, if there's an injury somewhere, this group can absorb that. They can handle that, and if they need to move Morrison around to help them bridge that gap, then they will. I think the secondary is in great shape, and it needs to be great for this team to get to Charlotte.
Absolutely. 5th key, AJ, the last one before we head out. This is actually one thing I'm really looking for, well, not really looking forward to. I should say really interested in seeing how things develop as the season goes on because of, well, how 2020 has gone so far. But injuries and positive COVID tests have to be limited for North Carolina. Like I mentioned, I'm really interested to see how teams and things go as you get into week 3, week 4, week 5. If there's a lot of positive cases around the country, we all know how Carolina dealt with injuries last year, particularly on defense and in that secondary. So for Carolina to reach the ACC title game, you got to have limited injuries. And I know it's out of a lot of these people's controls, unfortunately, for Carolina and Mac Brown and his staff, but you got to make sure those positive COVID tests are as low as they can possibly be.
Yeah, and obviously injuries in 2020, positive COVID tests are going to be a key for every team. But if you have them, where do you have them? And can you absorb it? I was just saying, I think the secondary can handle it if a couple of guys go down or test positive because they have so many numbers back there. But there are other spots in this roster that won't handle as well. Offensive line, they can't afford to lose any of those guys. I mean, they are struggling to get to 7. Max said when camp opened, they wanted 10 guys that they could trust. Well, then they went to 8. And then he said, we would settle for 8, we want 10. Well, they don't have Tristan Miller this year. He's dealing with family stuff. Billy Ross opted out 2 weeks ago. He was certainly a guy that played 600 snaps at Carolina, had an experience, was certainly a body there. William Barnes hasn't quite gotten to where people projected when he arrived a couple of years ago. So what you're dealing with right now is you've got 5 really experienced guys, 4 of whom are starters. The one starter that doesn't have much experience is Awesome Richards, and but he won that job before Mac told us in December or in February he was going to be the starter at left tackle, and he is the starter at left tackle. Jonathan Adorno is a true freshman. He's the 7th guy, and he's the backup at center. And they've told us all along they want to play the backup at center, 15, 20 snaps at least, because Brian Anderson played over 900 snaps last year and didn't start until the 3rd game. And at noon on Saturday, it could be 85 degrees. You need to play your backup. So offensive line, they can't afford to lose anybody. If they do, they're going to be playing guys that the staff is not right now comfortable with. I don't know if they can afford anything at tight end because they don't really know yet what Kamari Morales can give them behind Garrett Walston. And they need Sam Howell to stay healthy and to not test positive. And it's no slight to Jace Ruder or even Jacoby Criswell, but the 2 of them have been battling all along. Ruder's been banged up so much at Carolina. He's missed so many practice reps that he would be very green, even though he's in his 3rd year in the program. He'd be very green if they inserted him into a situation where he had to run the team. And then, of course, the defensive line, they can't afford anything. And even the outside hybrid spot where Tamad Fox and Tyrone Hopper are, they got freshmen behind them. They got a lot of true freshmen over there in defense in those spots. Miles Murphy on the defensive line. you don't want to have to rely on those guys for 70 snaps a game. So there's some spots where they can't absorb this stuff. And if they could stay healthy there, then I think they're going to be in really, really good shape. And anybody that follows this program knows staying healthy has been a problem the last few years.
Absolutely. It really has been. Going back to the Fedora years, I mean, there were some years when it was just almost comical how many guys were getting hurt, AJ. But that's 5 keys for UNC reaching the ACC title game in Charlotte. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. It's an exciting time of year. Football season is officially back, and high expectations are officially back for the North Carolina football program as well. As always, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, be sure to share it, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.